We mourn the Library of Alexandria. Every educated person knows the story. The greatest repository of ancient knowledge, destroyed by fire, setting human civilization back by centuries. We're taught to grieve this loss as one of history's great tragedies. But what if Alexandria wasn't the greatest library ever lost? What if a far larger repository of knowledge existed much more recently? What if millions of books, not thousands, were deliberately destroyed not in ancient times but within the last 2 centuries? What if the real tragedy isn't Alexandria at all, but something far closer to our own time, something so thoroughly erased that we don't even know to mourn it? I started this investigation after noticing something strange about library history. The official narrative doesn't add up, the numbers don't work, the timelines contradict themselves, and everywhere I looked, I found evidence of destruction on a scale that makes Alexandria look like a minor house fire. The Tartarian Grand Library, a repository of knowledge so vast that its destruction required coordinated action across continents. A collection so dangerous that every copy of certain texts had to be hunted down and eliminated. A record of human achievement so threatening to the post-reset order that its very existence had to be erased from memory. The evidence is fragmentary but consistent. References in documents that survived. Architectural remnants of buildings too large to have served their attributed purposes. Catalogue entries for books that no longer exist and supposedly never did. The testimony of witnesses who saw things they weren't supposed to see. Something was destroyed. Something enormous. And we've been taught to forget it ever existed. Let me start with what we're told about library history. The great libraries of the ancient world are well documented. Alexandria, Pergamon, the Library of Ashurbanipal. We know approximately how many scrolls they held, what subjects they covered, how they were organized. Then comes a gap. The medieval period supposedly saw knowledge contracted into monastery collections, small libraries preserving fragments of classical learning through dark centuries. The Renaissance brought recovery. Printing made books abundant. Libraries grew again. By the 19th century, great national libraries held millions of volumes. This narrative presents library history as a U-shaped curve. Ancient greatness, medieval decline, modern recovery. A story of loss and redemption, with our current era representing the triumphant return of abundant knowledge. But the narrative has problems. The first problem is the 19th century library buildings themselves. Every major city built grand library structures during this period. Massive buildings with soaring reading rooms, elaborate decoration, and storage capacity far exceeding any documented collection. The Boston Public Library opened in 1895 with shelf space for over 2 million books. But the collection at opening numbered far fewer. The building was constructed for a collection that didn't exist yet. The same pattern appears worldwide. The British Museum Reading Room, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the Library of Congress, buildings of immense capacity constructed before the collections supposedly grew to fill them. We're told this reflects optimistic planning, visionary librarians anticipating future growth, civic pride demanding impressive structures regardless of immediate need. But the consistency of this overbuilding is suspicious. Libraries across different countries, built by different architects, serving different populations, all showing the same pattern of capacity, dramatically exceeding collection size. What if the buildings weren't built for future collections? What if they were built for existing collections that were then destroyed? The architectural evidence supports this interpretation. Many 19th century library buildings show the Tartarian characteristics we've documented in other investigations. The sophisticated construction techniques, the impossible precision, the features suggesting repurposing rather than original construction. The reading rooms in particular raise questions. Vast, domed spaces with perfect acoustics. Natural lighting engineered to illuminate without creating glare. Climate control systems maintaining stable temperature and humidity without modern technology. These aren't features you'd build for empty shelves waiting to be filled. These are features you'd build to protect an existing collection of immense value. Features designed for preservation of something already present. The buildings weren't constructed in anticipation of books. They were constructed around books that were later removed. The catalogue evidence is even more suggestive. Early library catalogues from the 19th century reference works that cannot now be found. Not obscure titles that might have been lost through normal attrition. Major works, multi-volume sets, comprehensive treatments of subjects that supposedly weren't studied until later. I found references in an 1840s catalogue to a 12-volume history of atmospheric science that doesn't appear in any modern bibliography. The catalogue entry includes detailed subject descriptions suggesting sophisticated understanding of topics we consider modern discoveries. Another catalogue from the 1850s lists a comprehensive atlas of global underground infrastructure, tunnel networks, subterranean chambers, underground rivers, detailed maps of features that modern geology doesn't acknowledge exist. A third references a medical encyclopedia describing treatment approaches that match what we've reconstructed of Tartarian medicine, frequency healing, environmental therapy, methods that were supposedly never developed until recent alternative medicine movements. These catalogues weren't forgeries created to deceive modern researchers. They were working documents used by librarians managing actual collections. The books they reference existed. People checked them out, read them, returned them, and then they disappeared. The disappearance followed a consistent pattern. Between approximately 1850 and 1900, libraries worldwide experienced a series of catastrophic losses. Fires destroyed major collections, floods damaged irreplaceable materials, administrative reorganizations resulted in massive deaccessioning. Each loss was explained locally: accidental fire, inadequate facilities, changing collection priorities. Nothing to suggest coordination. But the pattern of what was lost reveals something other than accident. Technical works disappeared disproportionately. Books on engineering, energy systems, medical approaches, agricultural methods, practical knowledge that might allow reconstruction of lost technologies. Historical works covering certain periods vanished almost completely. The centuries before the supposed reset, the era when Tartarian civilization would have flourished. Maps and atlases showing geographic features that don't match modern understanding were particularly targeted, as if someone was eliminating evidence of how the world once looked. The losses weren't random, they were selective. Someone was curating what survived. The Library of Congress fire of 1851 destroyed approximately 35,000 books, nearly two-thirds of the collection at that time. The official explanation blames a defective chimney flue, an accident, bad luck. But the fire occurred during a period of intense debate about what the National Library should contain. Some argued for comprehensive collection of all human knowledge. Others insisted on limiting the library to materials directly relevant to legislative function. The fire conveniently resolved this debate. The comprehensive collection was destroyed. What replaced it was more limited, more controlled, more carefully curated. Among the works lost were extensive holdings on engineering and technology, scientific treatises of unclear provenance, historical documents covering periods that subsequent official history would treat very differently. The fire didn't just destroy books, it destroyed evidence. Evidence of knowledge that the post-fire library would never again contain. The British Museum Library experienced similar losses during the same period. Officially, these resulted from inadequate storage conditions, books deteriorating from improper care, materials discarded as unsalvageable. But the materials discarded followed the same pattern as the American losses: technical works, historical documents from certain periods, maps showing features that contradicted emerging official geography. The Bibliothèque Nationale de France, the Russian State Library, the Great Libraries of Germany and Austria, all experienced significant collection losses during the mid to late 19th century, all following the same selective pattern. The coordination is unmistakable once you see it. Different countries, different library systems, different administrative structures, all losing the same categories of material at the same time. This isn't coincidence. This is policy. The replacement collections tell their own story. After the losses, libraries were rebuilt. New acquisitions filled empty shelves. The buildings that had seemed too large gradually filled with books. But the new collections differed fundamentally from what had been lost. The technical works that replaced destroyed engineering texts described more primitive technologies. The historical works that replaced lost chronicles told different stories about the same periods. The maps that replaced destroyed atlases showed different features, different boundaries, different understandings of geography. The libraries didn't just lose books. They lost one version of knowledge and replaced it with another. So the shelves refilled, but with different content that supported different conclusions about history, science, and human capability. The Grand Library wasn't just destroyed, it was replaced with a counterfeit, a controlled collection that would shape understanding for generations. The human cost of this destruction extended beyond lost books. Librarians who resisted the reorganization faced consequences. Some lost positions, some were discredited professionally, some simply disappeared from historical records as thoroughly as the books they'd tried to protect. I found references to a librarian at a major European institution who protested the deaccessioning of materials he considered irreplaceable. His letters describe desperate attempts to preserve works scheduled for destruction. His correspondence ends abruptly in 1867. No death record, no resignation notice, no further mention in any institutional document. Others faced more subtle pressure. Careers stalled for those who asked too many questions. Advancement came to those who cooperated with the reorganization. The profession was reshaped to ensure compliance. By the early 20th century, librarianship had been transformed. The new generation of librarians didn't remember what had been lost. They managed the replacement collections as if those collections represented comprehensive knowledge. They had no framework for recognizing what was missing. Some materials escaped destruction. Private collectors obtained works before they could be eliminated. Family libraries preserved texts that institutional collections discarded. Books fled across borders to jurisdictions where destruction hadn't yet reached. These surviving fragments provide glimpses of what was lost. In a private collection in Switzerland, I examined a technical manual describing electrical generation from atmospheric sources. The text, dated 1823, presents this technology as established practice rather than theoretical speculation. It includes maintenance procedures and troubleshooting guides, suggesting widespread deployment of systems that officially didn't exist. In a family library in Argentina, I found a historical chronicle covering European events from 1780 to 1820 that contradicts official accounts at nearly every point. Different rulers, different events, different outcomes, a history that doesn't match what we're taught. In an estate collection in Japan, I discovered an atlas showing North American geography with features that appear on no modern map. Cities in locations now uninhabited, rivers following different courses, coastlines that don't match current geography. Each fragment suggests a larger whole, a comprehensive body of knowledge that once existed and was systematically eliminated. The scale of the Tartarian Grand Library can be estimated from these fragments. If the surviving collections represent even a small percentage of what existed, the total holdings would have numbered in the tens of millions of volumes, perhaps hundreds of millions, a collection dwarfing anything that supposedly existed before modern times. This scale seems impossible given pre-industrial printing limitations. How could so many books have been produced before industrial processes made mass publication practical? But this objection assumes Tartarian technology matched what we attribute to that era. If they possessed advanced manufacturing capabilities, book production would have been correspondingly advanced. Printing at scales we consider modern might have been routine for Tartarian civilization. The massive library buildings suddenly make sense. They weren't overbuilt for modest collections. They were appropriately sized for holdings we can barely imagine. When those holdings were destroyed, the buildings remained too substantial to demolish, too useful to abandon. So they were repurposed, refilled with lesser collections, their original scale attributed to civic pride rather than actual need. The destruction wasn't accomplished in a single night. Despite my title, the process extended over decades. The coordinated elimination of Tartarian knowledge required sustained effort across multiple countries and institutions. But the title captures something true about the destruction's character. It was deliberate, it was comprehensive, it aimed at total elimination rather than partial reduction. And there were specific nights when specific collections were destroyed, fires that consumed entire buildings in hours, decisions made in single meetings that condemned thousands of volumes to elimination, moments when irreplaceable knowledge vanished forever, the night the Library of Congress burned, the nights when European collections were sorted, with condemned materials removed for destruction, the nights when private collectors died and their libraries were seized and dispersed, millions of books destroyed across thousands of nights, but each night representing a deliberate choice, a decision that certain knowledge must not survive. The question of motive remains. Why destroy knowledge? What threat did books pose that required their elimination? The answer lies in what the books contained. Technical knowledge would have allowed reconstruction of Tartarian technology, the atmospheric energy systems, the advanced agriculture, the sophisticated medicine. Books describing how these systems worked would have enabled their restoration. Historical knowledge would have contradicted the replacement narrative. Books describing what the world actually looked like before the reset would have exposed the lies being constructed. People who read accurate history couldn't be convinced that the degraded present was actually progress. Scientific knowledge would have revealed how much had been lost. Books demonstrating sophisticated understanding of physics, chemistry, biology would have shown that the post-reset civilization was rebuilding from catastrophic loss, not advancing toward new achievement. The books had to be destroyed because they told the truth, and the truth would have made the new order impossible to maintain. The replacement knowledge served specific purposes. The new technical works described technologies that could be controlled, centralized power generation instead of distributed atmospheric collection, industrial agriculture instead of sophisticated local production, pharmaceutical medicine instead of environmental healing. The new historical works told stories that justified current arrangements, progress narratives showing steady advancement, tales of primitive ancestors whose achievements we had surpassed. chronologies that made the present seem like the pinnacle of human development. The new scientific works established frameworks that precluded Tartarian approaches, thermodynamics denying free energy, medicine rejecting environmental factors, physics dismissing atmospheric electricity as unusable. The replacement library didn't just fill empty shelves, it programmed minds. It established the parameters within which people would think. It made certain questions literally unaskable because the concepts needed to ask them had been eliminated. The control of knowledge continues today. Modern libraries are subject to systematic constraints that most users never notice. Certain subjects are effectively suppressed through cataloging decisions. Materials exist but cannot be found through normal search procedures. I've encountered this personally in researching Tartarian topics. Books that appear in old catalogues but not in current systems. Requests that generate no results despite evidence that the materials exist. Library staff unable to explain why certain items cannot be located. Digital systems make this control easier, not harder. Search algorithms can be adjusted to suppress certain results. Databases can be modified to remove references to inconvenient materials. The appearance of comprehensive access can be maintained while actual access is carefully limited. The Grand Library continues to be managed. The destruction wasn't a historical event that ended. It's an ongoing process that continues today. Each generation's understanding carefully curated to prevent recovery of what was lost, but fragments continue to surface. Private collections pass to heirs who don't understand their significance. Estate sales disperse materials that controlled institutions would never release. Digitization projects occasionally capture images of pages that aren't supposed to be publicly available. The internet has accelerated this process. Materials that were effectively suppressed when they existed only in single physical copies can now be photographed, shared, and distributed globally. The control that depended on physical scarcity becomes impossible in a world of digital abundance. Researchers connecting fragments from different sources begin reconstructing what was lost. A technical description from one collection matches an illustration from another. Historical accounts from different continents confirm each other's impossible claims. The picture becomes clearer with each fragment recovered. The Grand Library is being rebuilt, not in a single location, but distributed across thousands of researchers, each holding pieces of the puzzle. The destruction that took decades is being reversed through patient reconstruction. What have we recovered so far? The energy technology is becoming clear. Multiple fragments describe the same systems from different angles. The atmospheric collection networks, the distribution infrastructure, the devices that drew power from planetary electrical flows. The medical knowledge is being reconstructed. Descriptions of treatment approaches match across sources that couldn't have been coordinated. Environmental healing, frequency therapy, methods that work when tested despite being officially impossible. The historical record is being reassembled. Events that were erased are being recovered from fragments that escaped destruction. The timeline before the reset is becoming visible. The civilization that was supposed to be forgotten is being remembered. The Tartarian Grand Library is being rebuilt one fragment at a time. The implications of this recovery extend beyond historical curiosity. If Tartarian technical knowledge can be recovered, Tartarian technology can be rebuilt. The energy systems, the agricultural methods, the medical approaches, everything that was lost could potentially be restored. If Tartarian historical knowledge can be recovered, the lies that justify current arrangements will be exposed. The progress narrative will collapse. The structures built on manufactured ignorance will lose their foundation. If Tartarian scientific knowledge can be recovered, the artificial limitations on current research will become visible. The forbidden directions will be revealed as forbidden by policy, not physics. The suppression will be recognized as suppression. The recovery of the Grand Library doesn't just restore old books. It threatens everything built on their destruction. This explains the continued suppression. The same interests that benefited from the original destruction benefit from continued ignorance. The same power structures that required the elimination of Tartarian knowledge require the prevention of its recovery. Research into Tartarian topics faces obstacles beyond normal academic challenges. Funding is unavailable, publication is blocked, careers are damaged. The gatekeeping that controlled physical libraries has been adapted to control digital information flows, but the suppression is failing. Too many fragments have escaped. Too many researchers are connecting pieces. The distributed reconstruction cannot be stopped the way a centralized library could be burned. The Grand Library is returning, not in the form it once took, but in a form appropriate to our age. Distributed, redundant, impossible to destroy through any single action. What was lost in those nights of destruction? Knowledge that would have transformed human life. Understanding that would have eliminated poverty, cured disease, and freed humanity from grinding labor. Records of achievement that would have inspired rather than intimidated. The Tartarians weren't gods or superior beings. They were humans who had developed their potential more fully than we've been allowed to develop ours. Their library contained the record of that development, the path they had walked, the knowledge they had accumulated, the achievements that proved what humans could accomplish. That record was burned because it was dangerous, not to humanity but to those who control humanity, not to progress but to those who profit from stagnation, not to truth but to those whose power depends on lies. The destruction of the Grand Library wasn't a tragedy that befell us. It was a crime committed against us, a deliberate impoverishment of human knowledge to serve particular interests, and those interests are still served by our continued ignorance. Every day we struggle with diseases that might be curable. We pay the price of destroyed medical knowledge. Every day we labor for energy that might be free. We pay the price of destroyed technical knowledge. Every day we believe we live at the pinnacle of progress. We pay the price of destroyed historical knowledge. The Grand Library was burned so that we would pay these prices, so that we would remain dependent, struggling, ignorant, so that we would never know what was possible and therefore never demand it. But knowledge wants to be free. The fragments that survived are multiplying. The researchers who connect them are growing in number. The picture they're assembling becomes clearer with each passing year. The Tartarian Grand Library cannot be completely destroyed because it exists now in too many places. Every researcher who holds a fragment is a library. Every connection drawn between fragments is a catalogue entry. Every conclusion reached from assembled evidence is a book that cannot be burned. The destruction took decades. The reconstruction will take time as well, but it's happening. The library is returning, and when enough of it has been recovered, when the picture becomes clear enough, when the lies become impossible to maintain, everything will change. The knowledge that was supposed to be lost forever will be found. The truth that was supposed to remain hidden will be revealed. The Grand Library will stand again, not in a single building that can be burned, in millions of minds that cannot be. The Tartarian Grand Library held the record of human possibility, millions of books describing what our ancestors achieved, what they understood, what they could do. It was destroyed because that record was dangerous. Because people who knew what humans could accomplish wouldn't accept what they were being offered instead. But destruction isn't permanent. Knowledge persists in fragments. Truth survives in corners. The record that was meant to disappear is being reconstructed. Every fragment recovered is a victory against those who burned the library. Every connection made is a defeat for those who wanted us ignorant. Every truth revealed is a step toward the world they tried to prevent. The Grand Library is returning, one fragment at a time, one researcher at a time, one truth at a time, until the record is complete again, until we know what was taken from us, until we can rebuild what was destroyed. The millions of books burned across those terrible nights are being rewritten in our research, in our connections, in our refusal to accept that knowledge can be permanently destroyed. The Tartarian Grand Library lives, and it grows every day.